Inside a crowded hall in Rome, a circle of men closes slowly around one man. They are not enemies, not soldiers, not strangers. They are senators, friends, men he pardoned, men he promoted, men he trusted with his own life. One of them steps forward first, then a second, then a third. Within seconds, it isn't an attack anymore. It's a swarm. Robes tear, blood spreads fast across cold marble. By the time it's over, Julius Caesar, the single most powerful man on earth, lies dead at the feet of people who loved him. Hold that image for a moment, because it's the wrong question history usually asks. This isn't a story about how he died. Historians have argued over the details for 2,000 years, and honestly, the how was never the interesting part. This is a story about why. Here's a question no textbook fully answers. How do good men, smart men, loyal men, men who genuinely believe they're doing the right thing, talk themselves into murdering a friend? Not one man did this. More than 60 senators were part of it. Statesmen, war heroes, men Rome trusted to run an empire. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. Several of them owed Caesar their lives. He'd captured them in war, and instead of killing them, he forgave them, gave them power back, called them friends. They killed him anyway. Why? Not history, psychology. Somewhere between being spared and standing in that room with a blade in hand, something shifted in each of these men. Something convinced them murder wasn't just necessary, it was noble. To understand how gratitude curdles into a knife, we can't start with the assassination. We have to go back, decades earlier, to a boy nobody expected much from at all. He came from an old aristocratic family. By the time he was born, they'd run out of almost everything except the name itself. No money worth mentioning, no real power left. Just a story passed down for generations that the family was descended from a goddess. Most people would have quietly let a story like that die. Caesar decided to spend his entire life proving it true. As a teenager, that decision nearly got him killed. A dictator named Sulla wanted him dead, simply for being related to the wrong people. Caesar ran, hid, waited him out, and lived. He learned something from it that never left him. In Rome, survival wasn't about being the strongest man in the room. It was about being useful. Useful to enough people that they wouldn't let you disappear. So he built exactly that kind of usefulness. He spent money he didn't have, funding games, feeding crowds, buying loyalty one favor at a time, until ordinary Romans loved him more than they loved most of the men actually in charge. Then he went further. For 8 years, he led an army into Gaul and conquered nearly all of it. He even crossed the sea into Britain, a place most Romans considered the edge of the known world. He came home unbelievably rich. But wealth wasn't the part that frightened the Senate. What frightened them was the army standing behind him. An army that no longer answered to Rome. It answered to him. A man that powerful, that loved, commanding soldiers who'd follow him anywhere, wasn't a general to the Senate anymore. He was a problem. So the Senate did what frightened men in power usually do. They ordered him to give up his army, come home unarmed, face them without protection. Caesar had 2 options left: obey and risk losing everything he'd built, maybe his life along with it, or refuse and become an enemy of the state. He crossed a small, unremarkable river called the Rubicon. Army still behind him. The die is cast, he's said to have told them. It was, technically, an act of war against Rome itself. Civil war followed. Caesar won. And then he did something almost nobody in his position had ever done. He didn't execute the men who'd fought against him. He forgave them, handed back their titles, their power, sometimes their lives outright. To Rome, it looked like mercy, maybe even greatness. What it actually was a decision that would eventually let his own murderers stand close enough to reach him. Because one of the men he spared wasn't just an enemy he defeated. He was someone Caesar had once loved, like a son. His name was Marcus Brutus. His mother, Servilia, had been close to Caesar for years, close enough that some ancient writers whispered Caesar might even be his real father. Modern historians mostly reject that. The ages don't add up. But the bond between the two families was real, and everyone in Rome knew it. After the war, Caesar didn't just let Brutus live. He promoted him, trusted him with real power. Reportedly told his own officers during the fighting itself, "Spare that one, whatever happens." So sit with this question for a second. What do you owe someone who saves your life twice? Brutus already had an answer waiting in his blood. Centuries earlier, an ancestor he claimed, also named Brutus, had helped drive Rome's last king out of the city forever. Ever since, that name had meant something very specific in Rome. The man who ends tyrants. He was also, by then, married into a family that despised everything Caesar stood for. His wife, Porcia, was the daughter of Cato, a senator so opposed to Caesar's rule that he'd taken his own life rather than live under it. Cato's death had already turned him into a kind of martyr among men like Brutus. And slowly, people started reminding Brutus exactly who he was supposed to be. Someone began scratching messages onto walls around Rome at night. "You are asleep, Brutus. You are no true Brutus." Nobody signed them. Nobody needed to. He wasn't the only one being worked on. There was another senator paying close attention, sharper than Brutus, more experienced, far less sentimental. His name was Cassius. Cassius followed a philosophy that said a wise man should stay out of political chaos entirely and protect his own peace of mind. That's what he claimed to believe anyway. What actually moved him looked a little more personal. Caesar had just handed out two of Rome's most prestigious government positions. The better one went to Brutus. Cassius got what was left over. To some people, that's a minor slight. To a proud Roman senator, carrying a grudge and quietly ignoring his own philosophy, it was something closer to a wound that wouldn't close. So Cassius went to work on Brutus, carefully, patiently. Never about grudges, always about Rome, about liberty, about ancestors. Meanwhile, a third man was already close enough to Caesar to do something neither Brutus nor Cassius could manage alone. Someone Caesar trusted without question. Someone whose DNA you dend, and whose betrayal, when it comes, will be the hardest one in this entire story to watch. His name was Decimus, a general, a trusted officer, one of Caesar's closest friends, so close that Caesar had named him in his own will. On the morning of the 15th of March, it was Decimus who walked into Caesar's house. Because Caesar had almost stayed home that day. His wife, Calpurnia, had a nightmare the night before, something about him dying in her arms. She beckmids to go. Weeks earlier, a seer had warned him too, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar actually listened. He was on the verge of cancelling the grieve entirely. That's when Decimus separated.
He laughed off the dream, told Caesar the Senate would mock him for hiding from a nightmare,
Told him, gently, that it would make him look afraid. Caesar trusted him completely. So he got dressed, and he went. On the way, a stranger pressed a folded note into his hand. A warning, listing the entire plot by name. Caesar never opened it. He just carried it into the building, past 60 men who already knew exactly what was coming. Inside, the senators gathered around him the way they always did, familiar, normal, until it wasn't. One man grabbed his robe, another struck first. Then it wasn't one attacker anymore. It was every hand you've spent the last several minutes learning the name of, each one taking part, because that was the plan too. No single killer to point to, just a room full of them. Guilt spread out so thin that no one man had to carry it alone. By the time it ended, the most powerful man in the world lay on the marble floor, killed by the exact number of wounds you already know, delivered by men whose reasons you now understand better than they probably understood themselves. And what the killers did next is almost impossible to believe. They walked outside, expecting Rome to cheer. They genuinely believed the streets would fill with grateful crowds, thanking them for saving the Republic. Instead, they stepped into something else entirely. Silence, then screaming, then an entire city in panic, running from them, not toward them. The Liberators had just made the single biggest miscalculation in Roman history. And they were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. Mark Antony saw his chance. At Caesar's funeral, he stood over the body and gave a speech that didn't ask the crowd to stay calm. It asked them to remember. He read Caesar's will out loud, line by line. Money left directly to the people of Rome. Land promised to ordinary citizens who had nothing. The crowd didn't hear a tyrant's will. They heard a friend's. Within hours, Rome wasn't confused anymore. It was furious. The men who'd called themselves Liberators didn't get parades. They got mobs. They fled the very city they thought they'd just saved. And what followed wasn't quick, and it wasn't clean. For the next 2 years, Rome tore itself apart again. New alliances formed. Old enemies were hunted down in a wave of killings that dwarfed the one that started it. Official death lists posted in public, turning neighbor against neighbor for a reward. Brutus and Cassius raised armies of their own and told themselves, right up until the very end, that history would remember them as heroes. At a place called Philippi, it fell apart. Not all at once, but in 2 battles, 3 weeks apart. Cassius died first, by his own hand, wrongly believing the entire cause was already lost. Weeks later, in the second battle, Brutus lost too, and made the same final choice. Neither one lived to see what came next, because the republic they'd killed Caesar to protect didn't survive either. Within a generation, Rome had a single ruler for life. Exactly what the assassination was supposed to prevent. Forever. They didn't save the Republic. They ended it. And here's the part that should actually follow you out of this video. These men weren't fools. They weren't cartoon villains twirling a knife for the fun of it. They were intelligent, loyal by their own definition, principled in their own minds, right up until the moment the blade went in. Every one of them found a way to believe that betrayal was the right thing to do. Not because they were uniquely evil, because human beings are extremely good at building a story that lets them live with something they've already decided to do. It's happened in a boardroom recently, somewhere.
It's happened in a friendship you know personally. It might happen in your own head someday, and you might not even notice it happening. So ask yourself, honestly, right now, if you were standing in that room, surrounded by people you trusted, all of them quietly agreeing it was the right thing to do, are you completely sure you wouldn't have picked up a knife too?